Benvenuti, Ernesto Damiani, to Villa La Collina, here at your home territory in Viante at Lago di Como. It's a magic place where trust has always been the core. And you, as the president of the consortium of the Italian computer science universities, a long-serving professor with very powerful EU projects, and professor at Khalifa University in Abu Dhabi, director of the Center for Cyber-Physical Systems and Robotics. It's a true honor for us to have your distinguished keynote here, that you deliver it. And trust as the core, trust, security, resilience. And you said your statement is, your key statement throughout your keynote, that sustainability should be at the core, should be a first-class citizen in everything we developed in the future with respect to AI assisted critical systems. Grazie mille.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. It's really, for me, really honored to be here. To be in this place in particular, because this is a really important place, a place where history was made, and I hope that history will continue to be made, in a sense, at least the history of ideas and the history of discussion. So basically, this is why I really was so happy to be here with friends, which some of them I haven't seen for a while, some of them I've been in touch with in the past, but in the recent past. But nevertheless, I'm very glad to be here, and this is also the opportunity for exchanging ideas. So more than a keynote, I would like to share with you some ideas. And I would like to start by telling you a little bit more in detail where do I come from the perspective that I will bring. Not that much for my personal history, but for the perspective that I will try to bring to this group, to this discussion. The perspective, well, of course, I am a computer scientist for my sins. This is what I do for a living. And mostly what I do all day is to try to set up solutions for making better decisions of different types, frankly speaking. So whatever we do here in Milan, but also in the UAE specifically, where we have so many involvements with the infrastructure projects, with projects that have to sort of develop the local capabilities, what we try to do is to use intelligence to make better decisions. This is a little bit my journey, and I wanted also to put together with my journey a little bit of it shows my age, to put the computers that I've been using for each step of my journey. What you see up there is the Torre Velasca, that some people consider it an horrible building, which is in the center of Milan. And the reason I put it there is just because the campus of the University of Milan, which is the first university in the city, is exactly under that. It's exactly under the Torre Velasca. The Duomo is just behind it, but it's hidden by the tower. So from there, I did my tenure track in the US. I visited many times in Australia. That's where we met with Elizabeth. And then I've been for a while in Lyon. And now my new home, scientific home, of course, because I continue to, which is in Abu Dhabi. And during all this journey, I've been sort of interested in how you make decisions, and especially how you use information to make informed decisions. And this has been started much earlier than people started to talk about artificial intelligence inference. So we were talking at the time about decision science. And the notion what we were trying to discuss at the time was, how do you use data to ground decisions in those data? A lot of companies were selling way to collect the data already at the time. A lot of companies were selling way to query data, but then you had to show that knowing the data, you would do better than someone else who just followed his guts. And that was not so easy as it may seem now. The notion is that collecting data about reality means look at it, collect observables. So you may have very sophisticated system for collecting data about reality. You may just have something which is data that you buy from other people, and then you will use those data to make your decisions. But basically, the data before being used for decisions needs some sort of a pre-processing. And this pre-processing is to move the observables into actionable knowledge that we can act on. And this is what we want to do all the time when we want to transform the reality. So in a sense, I believe that the technology, you may remember that this was a statement by Karl Marx that said, well, philosophers are always explaining the world, now we want to change it. And I believe that technologies were basically more effective because what we did was exactly this, not as a community, not individually, but as a community, we changed the world. The world today is much different from what it used to be, exactly because we found a way to transform the data into actionable knowledge that could be acted upon. So the notion is still doing this, but in this age, I have prepared this slide before the recent events. And already we were seeing a lot of change in the history in which we were looking at the situation of regionalization, of competition, increased conflict, in the sense as sort of an end to globalization. And now things are getting even worse. But as a counter part of this process of fractioning and mistrust, so instead of trusting, we are seeing mistrust between organizations, mistrust between people and their own employees, what the French call la société de la méfiance. Basically, your own president will not trust that you go to class. You don't trust your graduate student to actually be writing the paper. We are more and more in a situation in which we have less trust in each other. On the other hand, we have more and more the responsibility of taking decisions that can be proven to have properties. I call them non-functional properties. For example, fairness. For example, explainability. All these, I'm sure that you already have been discussed. These are not properties of the decision process per se, but these are properties that we want to make sure that the decision process has. So nobody now, these days, can just justify a decision, even a business decision, by saying it's because I say so. No one. You have to provide grounding. And now, I wanted to focus this talk not on properties like explainability or fairness in the decision-making process, which are, of course, I'm sure have been discussed by many others. I wanted to focus on sustainability. So sustainability is not a property of the decision-making process per se, but it is a property that the decision should ensure. So if I decide to do something, these days I need to be able to bring in the sustainability angle. Is what I'm doing good not only for my own cost function, but also for a more general social cost function that I need to take into account. So let's consider an example. Suppose that I am considering travel options. So travel options, people can go by car, but can go by taking a train and the plane, can go, well, whatever combination. And if I have to consider a strategy, a company strategy, for example, or a university strategy for authorizing or for supporting request of travel, I might want to put in yesterday, probably there was only the cost. Is someone going to pay for your trip? Do what you want. These days, I may want to add environmentally friendly tunnel planning. So I would want to be able to ensure that the decision that is taken not only is as the property that will, basically the person will be able to reach the place where is a duty travel, it's requested to go, but also that the choices of composing the legs of the trip were made in a way that is towards sustainability, global sustainability, in an environmentally friendly. So this is even more important, perhaps, that other side of a property like explainability. Now, we are all, sorry, I have to show something a little bit more technical. This is Vilfredo Pareto. He used to be an Italian teaching in a Swiss university, right? And so this is the Pareto front of the decisions. So basically, in the Pareto front of the decisions, you you have many candidate possible decisions that can be, in this case, you have only two criteria that will be the ones that you are looking at in order to support or justify your decisions. And the Pareto front basically is composed of the points of the decisions that in this case could be, on one side the cost of the timing of the trip, in the other case it could be the impact, and I will come to that, the impact of the trip in terms of environmental impact. And the Pareto front of this situation are the points that have no other points below, meaning that there is no other decision that can have either a lower cost or a lower impact. All those are possible selections. Of course, there are many because there are also other considerations that you have to take. But these are the Pareto front. So now what I'm saying here is I will want to show you a face. I don't know how many of you have seen this guy. This guy is a CNR researcher of the Italian CNR, and he's somewhere in the jungle doing biological studies or botanic studies. And he was fired. He was fired by the research institution because he refused to take a flight. He had to go back to a review of the project that he was working on. I'm sure it's a familiar scenario for many of us. We have to go to reviews. He had to go back to review, but he said, no, sorry. Since I am an environmental scientist, I will choose the policy of travel that will be acceptable from the multiple point of views, including the point of view of the impact. So I'm going to take a train, but the problem is that he was in Asia. So coming back by train made him miss the review day, and for this reason he was fired. Okay? So, okay, of course, let's take a look at the moment in how we would consider. So this is an interesting notion. Because of course, let's consider the evaluation of a travel agent strategy in computer science terms. Before AI, I will come to AI in a second. So there is an impact that this guy is taking into account, and correctly so. The impact in this case could be quantified numerically, and this is the point that I will discuss a little bit later. For example, in carbon tons per kilogram of cargo. So this guy looks like 60 kilos. So we could easily compute the amount of carbon tons that basically are the impact of his travel. But of course, this amount will vary whether he goes by train, he goes on foot, he goes on bike, or he takes a flight. Of course, so what he said is that this is the only criterion, because I'm an environmental engineer, environmental scientist. This is the only criterion that I will look at. And of course, this is going by train. Of course, he didn't consider, for example, the deviation from the desired arrival date, which was the day of the review. Probably he arrived several weeks afterwards. And this meant that if you look at the overall cost of this effect of this decision, the effect of this decision was not the one expected. But he refused to consider the multi-criteria. Now, let's be a little bit less radical than this guy, and let's say that we wanted to move to a situation in which the ordinary optimization problems, all of them, will have to include sustainability as a first-class citizen. This is what he did. Well, he exaggerated because he included it as the only citizen. But generally speaking, we are now in a situation in which, and it's not me speaking, it's the United Nations speaking. And I will show you in a moment all the initiatives that have been taken. We are obliged to have in place a way to make decisions that will take the social and the impact into account. Now, the rest of the talk is how. How we do take into account. First of all, how do we measure? Because I said carbon ton, and this is something. And secondly, how we take into account. Now, the problem is that there is an ongoing problem, is that the decision making is no longer done by humans. Most of the decision making today is actually made by models. So you have a lot of if it is a human, well, we will come to that. But what I'm saying is that the situation of having, not only by choice, but also by pressure, because we have this request that the impact is taken into account in decision making comes of the companies, you have to show that you do it. And there will be auditing on the decision of the top management, and you may be fined, and something can happen. So you have to take into account this impact, and you have to make it at least one of the citizens. So now let's discuss how you do it in a situation in which the decision making is often made by models which have been trained. So the notion is that you have the potentially measurable carbon ton per kilogram of weight for the different choices, and this is a value that you may trust or not. I'll come to that in a second. But how do you use it together with the other are easy, right? So this is the cost in dollars. This is for each solution. This is the delay with respect to the scheduled time that you would, if you go by train, if you go by, of course, this is not the trip from Asia to Milan. This is a shorter trip. And this is the quantification in the carbon ton per kilogram of weight. So the one way could be, okay, let's use it as one other of the criteria I have, and let's include it in the training of the models that will give me the answer. In a sense, I'm treating it not as a first-class citizens, but as a citizens like the other. What is the problem for this? And of course, if I do that, of course, the idea here is that the basic idea of AI, I don't have to repeat it to this audience, is that, of course, that would be equivalent to solving a classic problem of optimization in which you have a cost function that includes the social cost as part of it. But instead of doing that, you minimize the error function of a classifier. And the reason is that in many cases, you don't really have an idea of the coefficients that you would have to put in the cost function. You don't have an idea whether it's linear or non-linear. I see Sinan nodding because in the past, we tried actually to write and calibrate complex cost function that included social cost, but that was very difficult to do exactly for this reason of the calibration. So if I have examples, I can try to use a model. In the model, I will put also the information about the social cost as I put the cost of the ticket. And I may try to achieve the minimum of the error of the classifier on known instances of trips, of course, on trips that I know. And when I have that classifier, I may say, okay, I have a model that will decide or will give you an evaluation of your proposal of a trip of the different transportation media you will use for your trip. The evaluation will be given by this tool that takes the social cost or the environmental cost into account. It takes it into account because it was one of the features in the training. And the minimum of the error function of this classifier will be the best we can do with respect to the optimization or the reaching the minimum of this complex cost function, which includes as a citizen also the social environmental cost, because I put it in with a feature. Now, I love this guy. I have to have it in every other slide. So, what is the problem in doing so? Why can't we do that? Because, at least my opinion, but this is open to discussion, it's very difficult to have social negotiation on this type of metrics that measure the costs that are actually costs which are not really the social cost, collective cost. So how much will, for example, some carbon ton per kilogram looks like a number. Is it really a metric space? Two different trips that have different value of that. Okay, does the triangular inequality hold in the space of the carbon ton per kilograms? Not really sure, because if you look at how they are, if you see there's companies today are doing compensation, so they do comparison. They don't do arithmetics with those values. You can subtract one from the other. So this is a problem. Secondly, when I have that training set and I'm sampling those values, for each of the alternative trips, I have the cost expressed in that unit, carbon ton per kilogram of cargo. Are they really the samples that I'm getting taken in the same way? Is it the same taking the carbon ton per kilogram of cargo on a bike, the same the carbon ton per kilogram of cargo on a plane? Not really sure. And finally, I have another point that this guy reminds us that if we do like that, we are under the illusion that the social environmental cost is another variable like the other observables, and it can be put there as an observable and treated as one of the observables in decision making. Good luck. I mean, this is a very interesting discussion. Very interesting discussion. We want to do it. Before we go on, I would like to say that I don't blame artificial intelligence specifically. Even if you take a person and you make that person using a rule system, using whatever, we will come to that, come to make a decision like that, which is basically approve or not approve one proposal of trip which has a certain number of transportation media, you will get all these problems. Decisions are anyway subjective. The subjectivity is in the training set anyway, because you don't know those examples actually where they came from. Bias, is there bias? Yeah, most probably there is bias again in the training set, and controlling bias and subjectivity may look easy for the simple toy problem that I'm discussing now, but in general it's absolutely not that easy to control bias and control subjectivity. So let's go back now. I don't want to insist too much with this example. Let's go back for a second to the general setting. What we want to do is to provide a way in which elements which may be numerical or categorical, but anyway come from a social negotiation, are introduced into the decision-making process of the companies and of the people. This is what we want to do. We want that to be able to consider in the decision-making, and we also want to be able to certify that the decision-making process of someone takes that type of values into account. Those values don't come from direct observation, they come from a sort of social negotiation. And this is why I don't trust too much treating them as observables. But still, we want a way to treat those values and to put them in the picture. So before I go on, in case there are some social scientists here in the audience, I just I have 3 slides like this, in which it shows how was the effort until now at the European level and at the United Nations level to set up frameworks. I only gave you the example of the carbon ton per kilogram of cargo. There are many others indicators that have been indicator framework that have been set up starting from, I would say, the 80s. So this is a little bit the story. I go on, and this is something, the SRI index is something that some of you may have heard of. So the SRI index is basically an index that it would be very difficult to use it in a decision. So basically, it's a label, numerical label that you associate to a company, depending how far it is from the champions. So you have some reference banks, for example, that do banking in the best way. And then you have a number of indicators that you have to go and measure. And the distance from the champion gives the carbon ton per kilogram. So this is a number. But it's a number that, again, doesn't lend itself too much to be brought in together with observables in the decision-making process. So, but there are so many of those indexes. And I just showed you a few here. The story continues. Healthcare, for example, is another sector in which, and the EPI is the one that probably is more related to sustainability itself. It's a set of indexes, again, that is there to give you some sort of evaluation of the environmental impact of industry policies and state policies. State and industry policies. So you can say, I can give you the number that refers to a certain company or to a certain state. And of course, it is published for all the states. Italy has 57.4, just above Ireland a little bit, but well below most of the other European countries. Okay, so what I'm saying is that, again, these are even more complex to treat as part of decision-making process. Would you deal with the company in order or deal only with companies that have a common view of the world? Could you use that index to measure whether your potential partner, business partner, and in the decision whether to enter an agreement or to start a negotiation with that business partner, could you use that number? The number that gives you whether that partner policies are environmentally friendly or not? And I don't even enter the labor part, in which you have similar indicators of how people treat their workforce. And so again, in the decision making. So we have a big landscape here. And I tried my best, but it's not my cup of tea. I only know that these are not in a metric space. They are numbered, but they are not in a metric space, so we cannot easily use them for feeding them to some artificial intelligent guy who will tell us what to do. It's more difficult. So how are they used today, these numbers, if they are not used as part of the training set of the system? They are normally used to express preferences among alternatives. And this way, you basically use those numbers as a way to quantify the preference level of alternative decisions, and then you compare the decisions based on that number. So the number doesn't go into the decision process. The number is, when you have a certain number of alternatives, you kick out the AI and you start comparing the possibility that the AI told you using that number. So that number doesn't go with the rest of the features, doesn't have to be metric. All it has to do is to be ordinal, because you are using it for multi-criteria decision analysis. So it's a term that I don't want to bore you because I've already spoken too much, but this is something that is done, and I will remind you, and it can be done also in a statistically reasonable way. So this is what I'm saying. And probably the most known technique that is used for doing this type of stuff today is the AHP. AHP is basically a technique where people, and I have a full tutorial in my slides, but I've hidden it. But if anyone is interested, it's available as part of the slides, is a way that when you use an ordinal variable that will express your preference about a certain potential decision, so you already have the training done, you get the potential decisions, and among them, you consider now at the end the preference value, and you use it using a formalized set of criteria. So these papers are about doing this, exactly this. So there's a lot of people who have been working on taking sustainability indexes, not using them as part of the observables, but using them later in order to combine the decisions, to compare the potential decisions and to find the preferred one. Preferred one is the one that is best at the light of the index. Okay. Now, this is the first step. Basically, the notion is that both the potential candidate decision and the indexes that you are using, let's call them criteria, evaluation criteria, are both compared pairwise in order to try to build a hierarchy and then to bet the one which this is top in the hierarchy. I don't enter into the details of how this is done, because the problem, of course, is that you may have still some subjectivity in there. For example, the choice of the indexes that you use in order to compare the two alternatives. If I choose the carbon ton per kilogram of cargo and I compare two alternatives based on that, I will have a certain number. I have the step I will be making is look at the value, consider this acceptable, this not acceptable. Normally I use the values of the indexes to build a certain number of labels, quality labels that I assign to my potential solutions, and then I pairwise compare the solutions on all the possible labels that I derived from my indexes. Okay, so this is the procedure that it can be done. The problem is that it's very difficult to do decision making in a realistic setting using this stuff. It's very slow, and if you have many alternatives, because now we are talking train, plane, and bike, 3 alternatives, then I can do it. And in fact, in the tutorial that I have in the slides, you have 3, 4 alternatives. It shows how you build the hierarchy, and then you choose the decision that is top with respect to all the possible criteria. But the problem is that it doesn't scale. Okay, there are simplifications. Scoring model is one of those, but and there are also more complex. And I would like to mention this one just because I like it very much, because it doesn't assume linearity in the preference, meaning that when you are comparing 2 things, so one is as a label which is, for example, 2, and another which has a label of 3, you are assuming that the distance between the 2 alternatives is linear, meaning that every time, so the difference is 1 in the end, the delta is always 1. I don't want to bore you, but I just show you, these are the preference functions that are used for comparing the values of the criteria. So you might have flat parts that are called indifference zones. So basically this will practically not make, when I do the comparison between 2 values, as I told you, of quality that a certain solution has with respect to an index, and the value with respect to another, for example, if this is 2 and this is 3, I don't want to say that this is higher. I want to say that it is higher only if this one is at least 4. So I am doing the comparison among the different labels of the different alternatives using a much more complex setting. And I would like to send a fond memory to Professor Lofty-Zade, who in fact did the falsification of the preference functions, and there is a famous paper in which he proposed a fuzzy representation of the function. So let me, but this doesn't work. I'm very happy to say that this is good for business school type of teaching, but I don't think that this is the scalable way where we can integrate socially responsible sustainability criteria into the decision-making problem with AI. This is not the case. This is not what we can do. So what can we do? Okay, I'm already mostly finished. First of all, we have to recognize the problem. The decision-making is more and more automated. And if we want to have ethical decision-making that takes into account social responsibility indexes, we need to find a way to integrate, even numerically. And we cannot say, okay, let's run the AI first, and then we will have alternatives. And then on the alternatives, we come in with a method that was invented in the 80s. No. At least this is my opinion. This is not the way we can do it. We need a way in which AI can take into account this type of information, which is about the social acceptability of the decision that the AI is advising. And how do we do it? Well, of course, normally when you don't have any idea, you do a hybrid, right? So frankly speaking, I don't have a solution for this, but certainly it's very interesting. And I found some seminal work of people who worked especially in industrial engineering, and these people basically, this is the quantization of the indexes that I told you in order to have the comparable labels that I mentioned before. And then basically what they do was to try to train a regressor that will give you the preferences. So instead of applying, they only use the traditional method in validation of the regressor. So I was surprised to find that these people did that for choices of inventory management of all things. So basically they were choosing whether an inventory should be kept all centralized or distributed, how they manage the inventory. And basically this decision, they basically had the social impact of inventory management, which is an important topic, but already in 2016 they were looking at this, and they came out with the notion maybe we can train another AI to sort the AI, the alternatives that were computed by the previous AI, the one that is not ethic, the one that does not have any sustainability, that can take maybe very wrong decisions, but then we have the other guy, and the other guy is the good brother, and the good brother will, as a regressor, will try to give me the advice to point, this is the choice of the good person. And this is the very interesting, this is how the introduction of this guy modifies the Pareto front. So I started with the Pareto front, I'm ending with the Pareto front. Anyway, what conceptually made me think is that inserting the social responsibility modifies the Pareto front. And it doesn't modify, it can modify it also afterwards, after the fact, thanks to the good agent that comes in. Because in the end, the alternatives that you will choose will be moved back from the Pareto line if they are not ethically acceptable. So what remains on the Pareto front, and they have done a little bit of experiments on this. So, and this is their pipeline. This is their pipeline. So I just wanted to show this because I think it was a very interesting first attempt already in 2016. Now, my other idea, I have an idea myself, and my idea myself is actually taken from the notion that most of the indexes that we have today are taken by reference to champions. So we don't have probably anymore the boldness of just moralizing in an abstract term. So we don't say you shouldn't do this or that, we say do like him. So this is most of the indexes are built with the notion that a good guy is the one that resembles a champion, and the champion is the ideal. So we don't, as I said, philosophically speaking, it looks also that the person who authors this type of indexes doesn't have the moral authority to state the good behavior in general. It only gives you an example. Okay? So, but this can be used because that type of company takes decisions, and you could train your decision making with the adversarial training idea, which is giving more weight in the training to some specific points. And these points that you can use in order to make the training, your decision make training, will be the points of the good guy. So the authority could just simulate a good guy and say, these are examples of good decisions. When you train your model, which wouldn't take any ethics into account, please do adversarial overweighting to these points that basically will make your guy less good, less effective, but a little bit better in terms of ethics. So it's a little bit like saying, when you make your decision, keep in mind the decisions of the champion. Or when I say of the champion can of course be simulated. The authority could basically give us a certain type. So for example, acceptable company policy of some CNR in some country, which would try to, not in theory, but with practical example, mix the right mix of the transportation media, could be given to my decision maker, which is trained in such a way that those points are important and modify the separation surfaces at the interval. So my idea is we won't be able to moralize in theory any longer. What we may want to do is to find examples of good behavior. If you find examples of good behavior, you use them to train the decision maker you use to decide your own behavior. Will it work? Well, first of all, at least it takes away the abstract moralizing. The problem is that in this epoch, and I finish now, but in this moment of conflicting, the problem is don't accept any moral authority which expresses principles. You may still agree that the behavior of one guy is acceptable to everyone. If this is the case, then the examples of that behavior may be used to train the decision makers for the other guys. So this is just my 2 cents. Of course, we can have many others. So I finish with some discussion points. regardless of the effort that has been done to make numerical the indexes that express acceptability in terms of environment, in terms of human rights, in terms of whatever. Those are numbers, but I don't see anytime soon the possibility of using them as if they were observables. They are not really observables. So, of course, we know that we could do our decision making the usual way without any ethics and then add these numbers as preference to create a preference scale and then apply multi-criteria decision making on top to select among the alternatives that the AI has proposed. Yeah, but if we do that, we have a big problem. Nobody computationally knows how to do it in a practical setting. The alternatives that the AI proposes are too many, and also the time that we have to run the preference, the build-up of the hierarchy of preferences is too small. Also, there are other. So, what remains? How do we hybridize the model behavior that is suggested by social negotiation and the decision making taken only based on observables that the AI is making? This is the end of my talk, and I leave you with some of the literature that I've been taking a look at to prepare this talk. Thank you very much for listening with patience.
Yeah, grazie mille.
My pleasure. Un piacere.
With all your expertise and life experience and wisdom, the core for decision making, for the good. And for example, I mean, the world is driven nowadays by 8 huge platforms. I think only 8, 5 Americans and 3 Chinese platforms. So if these functions are for best practice, if such a component would be integrated, then perhaps
well, you know,
be more sustainable.
I would like to make this comment. What I said here, gives you an idea of a number of topics that is not me only alone. This is a typically European type of, you know, we want to be able to socialize the costs of decisions. And the socializing the cost of decision means that in taking a decision of parking your car as a second row in Milan, you have also to take into account the time lost by someone else. So because if you say I don't care because the grid is driving me, well, who cares? Parking your car like that is a good move. It's a good move because you will find it will be easier for you to do it. But if you also somehow have to take in the decision-making process into account also the time that you're making someone else losing, then your decisions will be different. So now the problem is, short of legislation, how do you incorporate this type of social cost in the decision-making when the decision-making is automated? And today, they are not considering. The Americans are not considering. The Chinese are not considering. I can tell you that no platform for design of infrastructure, for large-scale decision-making today used by the big boys takes social cost into account. They just claim.
Just a follow-up from my side, quantum computing, the massive potential for...
This is $1 billion question. Could we, you know, there have been, I would like to mention a couple of friends from physics departments. There is one very good in Palermo. There is another guy, Horst Simon, who used to be Livermore director and now he's in Abu Dhabi. So this guy, we have a lot of conversation on that. Certainly, the problem of this type of optimization could lend itself to some sort of a quantum formulation of the same type of the quantum formulation that you got for financial markets. So certainly, in principle, what we are trying here is to do multi-level optimization of some sort, and we have a lot of problems in doing it in the traditional way. I tried to explain, even when we move away from the traditional cost function to the error function of a classifier, we still have a big problem. Now, the question is, how does quantum computing come into this picture? It could come if the overall optimization of a socially relevant complex system, like a market or like the track, could be encoded in an Hamiltonian. I have no idea on how to do it, but there are a lot of physics experts that are actually looking at. You don't even need it's not that important, the quantum hardware. Important is the notion that you have a different idea of optimization that could be the quantum optimization. I see that there are other people who want to add something.
Yes, Ernesto, maybe first to understand my question, I'm a professor of information systems at a business school, and you introduced yourself, and from that I assume that you are actually involved in building solutions that work in practice to take better decisions. And in my class, when we are talking about machine learning based decisions, I teach 99% of a solution is cleaning the data, preparing the data, and just a very little part is the mathematical magic that you basically talk about. So can you tell us about examples where they have running systems to support these environmental sustainability decisions, where you solve this? How we deal with getting the data, that the data is continuously changing, like the index.
Yeah, this is a very good question. I can tell you in my talk what I said is that at the moment the optimization decisions that we are taking about choices are basically not considering, don't integrate the social impact or the environmental impact indexes. And the reason why they are not entirely integrated is due to the notion that they are different in nature. So what people do, for example, in the slides you will find examples of several systems for this Prometheus implementation. So there are several implementations here. You see the variation of the methods goes from 1 to 6. This is for after you have some alternatives that are Pareto optimal based on measurable feature, and this is just the normal optimization. I have to decide whether to put my inventory distributed in 3 countries or all in a centralized place. So I have to run my optimization of the placement of the environment. So SAP, we had in the old times we had an European project on that, in which basically the notion was decisions of inventory management taking into account faulty data or noisy data. That was with Karlsruhe many years ago. So there are many platforms in which you can do that type of optimization, but you are not taking into account the problem that by maybe partitioning your logistics, you are making people commute longer. So these people will be unhappy, and these people will maybe divorce their spouses after a while because they get home too late. So this is what I call the social cost. Now, at the moment, how do you integrate the social cost, which you don't measure when you do the optimization of the inventory management in the different warehouses? You don't take into account the fact that your employee will take have a longer commute, right? So it's his problem or her problem, right? So now what you do is you add this stage. This stage, you have many implementation. And this stage will say, okay, suppose that my optimizer gives me 2 Pareto optimal solutions, meaning that they are both the best that the optimizer can propose. And of course, forget whether the optimizer is a traditional operational research optimizer with a cost function or an AI optimizer which uses an error function and a classification. You get alternatives. Now, this guy is a family of tools which build on a standard, which is they basically will allow you to use some external index. For example, the spouse satisfaction index that I just invented, which makes your wife happy or your husband happy if you drive home in time. And that one can be used to compare the Pareto optimal solution to the optimization problem. Now, why should a company want to do that? And this, I think we can relate on this, because these days companies can be audited. In the European Commission has requested a certain categories of companies, including all the banks, and I know because I have a student who did his master thesis at Crédit Agricole, and he did exactly that. They have requested these entities to document how they take the indexes into account in their decision problem. And if you don't do it at the moment, you're just blacklisted. But the banks know very well that the push of the commission, the push of the authority is in the future you will be sort of fined. So now the companies want to not only to have the Pareto optimal points and choose one, might be the one that requires less upfront investment or something like that. They want also to be able to show to third parties that they evaluated the possible alternatives, and then they have chosen the one that makes the people more happy, for example, happier, or it has more environmentally friendly. To do that, the tools are there. You just have to Promete supporting tools. There are many. So I advise that the exercise. This is an exercise that I do with the business school colleagues. Sometimes we do this type of situation in which we simulate a scenario, we come up with some optimization potential alternatives, and then we try to apply one of the indexes defined by the authorities to define which one would be more acceptable. I know I'm talking too much, but I don't want to. So sorry about that.
Too short because we have to.
Okay, that's it.
So I also approach it because then it's on the microphone. So one interesting take home for me is you want to add sustainability to decision processes.
Yeah.
Highly complex, and your solution you propose is you add it to the quite abstract algorithms that take the decision to create role models that you propose to people. And so my question is, how can you keep the humans in the loop or on the loop of that? Because in the end, the function is very abstract, and the thing it's creating a role model for is really concretely affecting the humans.
By the way, how do you keep the humans in the loop? My simple answer is the humans are only in the loop in choosing the champions. They will choose the champions, and then the champions, the decisions in the champions, which can be simulated, by the way. I could extract the decision in the champions from a gamification platform, for example. I don't have really a champion company, but in this room, we play a game, and based on that game, we make decisions, and then those decisions, we sort of agree collectively that these are the good decisions ethically, right? We finish that. Those decisions will define a sort of a champion, and I try to train the decision maker that I will sell tomorrow to give more weight and importance to the type of decisions that were taken in the game. So this is my solution, and this is a solution that will only require us to agree on examples on good behavior, not on principles. When they tried to do that, UNESCO tried to do that. I was in Uzbekistan at the UNESCO conference, and where they discussed the UNESCO document on AI. You wouldn't imagine how people don't accept any abstract formulation. So we are talking to Iran alone made over 7,000 remarks to a text of because basically any statement, general statement like the Declaration of the Human Rights, is very difficult to be accepted in today. So my solution would be, let's agree on what is a good man or a good woman, a good person. Let's agree on that. Okay, finish.
One last question, but in 1 minute we have to leave.
I have the impression that decision making is a problem when it comes to the SDG, the feedback and the quality management. But what about 2030? There will be a new agenda. And what role does your decision-making proposals, the whole this scientific discussion play for the UN?
Okay, you are making me much more important than I am. I absolutely no role. I was just trying to put some discussion point on the table. They will, because normally the scientific community and the business school communities, which should be together in this thing. So I was in Abu Dhabi. We have INSEAD. They are there with the large business school. I talked to business school colleagues. I think we should be there together because, and I think we should have our voice being heard because otherwise they will go on defining frameworks and then they will pay lip service to using them. because the bank where my student made this thesis, well, they just answer to the authority, oh yes, of course, we printed all those indexes and all our managers took 3 hours course online about those indexes. And that is it, they done it. I mean, so you see my point? Now, we should make that thing part of the decision-making process, especially the part that is automated. Otherwise, it will be just, you know, pushing the envelope. Ok.
Grazie mille.
Ancora grazie a tutti, scusate.